Parental Canto. Throughout my teens and 20s, fatherhood had never crossed my mind, and only would, when she who'd be my wife when nights were wild expressed the wish to one day have a child. Since that was out of the question then for me, I asked a doc about a vasectomy, a fact I'm now embarrassed to admit. The doc said he knew no one who'd do it. Since though in theory it could be reversed, I might regret it and would feel they cursed my life through making me be childless. He eyed my girlfriend in her loveliness, as if to question whether she agreed with my request that he considered greed. For pleasure stripped of possibility, of parenthood's responsibility. The doc was right, although I didn't know it, and thought myself a wise, high-minded poet, unaware that I could be so stupid. But luckily the arrow shot by Cupid would lodge itself with depth, so when I popped the question to my girlfriend, I had dropped my hesitance and downright pure aversion to making of ourselves a smaller version. But when we married, my wife was a student, so at the time it didn't seem too prudent to have a child straight away so she could focus on her pharmacy degree. Avoiding having one back in those days was not too hard, as there were many ways, although those times appear now prehistoric and full of making love that was euphoric. But I regret one method that we used, the daily pill that I would have refused. Had it been me who had to take a pill to trick the body with a chemist's skill, and tampered with its balance and design, I wouldn't let such medicine in mine, and wish it had occurred to me back then that women shouldn't have to do what men would keep from doing for their body's sake, preventing thus a life that they would make. It's true the method is the most effective, compared to others risky and defective. And it's been helpful so the population will not explode too much through copulation. But still it seems to me to be unfair. The brunt is one that mostly women bear. But when she reached the age of 24, we didn't use precautions anymore. Because though in my past life I had winced at thoughts of having kids, my wife convinced me that the time was ripe for us to try, and we were so in love that I'd comply, by then without the slightest bit of fuss, resisting life that would be born from us. And trying was admittedly a blast, a lot of blasts, that I wish then would last. And when a year of great efforts had passed, and thoughts of parenthood had long receded, it seemed the thrilling efforts had succeeded. Within her womb had taken root a seed, yet still it didn't look like we'd succeed, and shortly after push a baby carriage, for some signs seemed to point toward miscarriage. The doc assured us that the embryo was rooted and continuing to grow. A fortune cookie verified the fact that our hope and our baby were intact, because my wife had two instead of one. But would we have a daughter or a son? With waves of sound what's hidden can be known. Thus was the gender of our baby shown. Afloat within an amniotic water, an ultrasonic picture of our daughter. It once had seemed like something to avoid, but fatherhood had made me overjoyed. While she was in the womb developing, I read her poems with their sounds enveloping her living room that she would kick, and ones I wrote for her would be first pick. Gestation was joyous and I found it amazing. There's more to making life than just a mating. I planned for what I'd say when she emerged, a person from her parents' cells that merged. But when the time of birth arrived at last, I found its torment ghastly and was aghast. I had expected joy to see her finally born, but when I saw the grimace of suffering she bore, as from the womb she was expelled and torn, All I felt was trauma at the torment and the gore. Those pains of birth are in the fading past, and labor's lengthy agony looks fast, and led to gladness I had never dreamed. May all our pains in life be thus redeemed. It's possible that I was not prepared, and full of joy instead of sick and scared, as I spent lots of time in lofty thought, and seeing it as life, but it was not. Or rather, there was more to life than that, the tough things of our earthly habitat. So when I could have cut the umbilical, my squeamishness made it unthinkable. The cord was cut, but we were indivisible, linked by a love from then that is invisible. Though I had once resisted fatherhood, I soon saw it as not just simply good, but great, though daily from the crack of dawn, my time to spare was often scarce or gone. And rare were nights of sleep that wasn't broken by cries for which I got up when awoken. She'd wake up wailing and I'd carry her until she slept. So many nights there were, a lot of sleep hours lost, until her doc looked at my worn-out mug in mild shock. She said she thought it time to ferberize, which means to not respond to infant cries. So babies can thus learn to sleep at night, without a need to have their appetite for being held whenever they're awake. It seemed then cruel, and yet for sleeping's sake, we had to try it out an awful time, in which it felt to us like vile crime, to hear her screaming as if being killed, by orders of the doctor who was skilled. But thankfully it worked. From that night on, our baby mostly slept until the dawn. We named her for a poet, Emily. I liked that her initials thus would be with S from her mom's last name, ESP, because I hoped she'd have an extra sense to see beyond the world opaque and dense, to realms of love that she'd help bring to earth in years beyond her forming and her birth. At first the most she did was poo and pee, and eat and sleep and cry, the same as me, and everyone when they're first starting out, when we just take things in and then we spout, whatever we can't use and then cry for, whatever we may need or want some more. But after months the seedling took deep root in life, and from her sprang the sweetest fruit. A smile spread from beautiful to cute. No helpless infant lying in a manger, she easily soon put herself in danger with things she wanted or would hanker for, and I took this as a grown-up metaphor. The world to her in those first days was fresh, the sights, the sounds, the feelings of things on flesh. The overflowing fun she'd daily find enthralled and thrilled her budding infant mind, that swung between amusement and amazement, with "ooh, ooh, ooh," her favorite exclamation. What had looked gross before I had a child, to clean a diaper soaked in pee and piled, became routine and not at all a bother, as she was my bébé and I her father. I taught her to say things like bicicleta, and this made my mom happy for her nieta, because it seemed that she would speak great Spanish, but for a time at least that hope would vanish. And on my shoulders squarely lies the blame, because I did a thing that now seems lame. Though in her first 3 years I'd mostly speak in Spanish with her, English soon would sneak its way into my words, because her wish from all she spoke at school was for English, the language which for comfort I preferred. In Spanish often I'd not know a word, and I had many books to read to her each night before her sleep, and they all were in English. But her mom stuck to Chinese, so now, grown to her teens, she speaks with ease. It's one of my regrets that I did not start her on the path to polyglot. Although I now regret I dropped the ball, she still can catch it, though I let it fall. Because my college job was civilized, I got parental leave that was well-sized. 3 months that we could use to take a trip across the world as we'd escape the grip of gravity for hours on a plane, till we had landed on a runway lane in China, where we'd visit my wife's kin, and we'd explore the country we were in. My daughter on her first trip had much fun, a center of attention, like the sun is center of the solar system. She would fill the days with jolliness and glee. But jolliness for us, her parents, was on its way out before too long, because we struck an iceberg. Our relationship began to sink, though it had been a ship we deemed unsinkable. When we came back, we saw the vessel's hull begin to crack. But since I knew the pain of having had a broken home, a split-up mom and dad, I was determined not to let that fate be one my daughter too would have to face. But one night an explosive argument convinced me that the two of us weren't meant to stay together for my daughter's sake, as she would suffer from a larger ache of verbal warfare that obliterated all chance of our not being separated, at least until the trouble had subsided. But soon, instead, divorcing was decided. My wife soon met another man, and she then had a second daughter who would be a sister from another family, a blessing for my daughter Emily. When my parents had split, they each moved far. You'd have to take a plane, not just a car. And I moved with my mom, and from then on, from most of daily life, my dad was gone. As distance of a continent or sea would make him someone that I'd hardly see, I was determined not to let that fate befall my daughter, for whom I would fade to distant memory, a monthly check, a casualty of marital shipwreck. I met some other dads who barely saw their kids because the judges and the law would tend to favor mothers, and was sad to think I might become an absent dad. But we agreed to sharing custody, with schedules of a time spent equally, no parent more important than the other, of equal worth a father and a mother. Though since I lived where she would go to school, she'd spend most days with me, the judge would rule that our agreement was one that was fair, although it looked complex, the time we'd share. My ex, however, sought to leave the state, and wished I'd sign a paper that would state that she could take our daughter if she left, but that felt like agreeing to a theft. I recall as one of the happiest days of life my lawyer telling me that my ex-wife could not take her unless I gave approval, and I would not agree to that removal. I taped the law on my refrigerator because it made me happy. When years later my ex-wife moved away, my daughter chose, her childhood then drawing to a close, to stay with me and finish with her schooling, long after the divorcing judge's ruling. I moved to an apartment up the stairs, and going out I often would get stares, because my little daughter's features were Chinese, so people thought I adopted her. By then, most people had a mobile phone, which was a thing I hadn't cared to own. But I wished to be reachable whenever my kid was at her mom's, though that meant never, or rarely could I make a plan at all, because I was at her mom's beck and call. But I did not protest or start a war, because this meant I'd see my daughter more. And it gave me an awful pain to know that I would miss some days that she would grow. Unlike the lucky parents who aren't forced to spend less time because they aren't divorced. Before I'd been a dad, I didn't drive, and everywhere I went I would arrive, by bike or bus or train, or if too far, as passenger in someone else's car. But fatherhood had made me a chauffeur, and when my kid was far I could show her The distance wouldn't keep us long apart. When we spent time together, we'd make art, and I would keep her finish works and drafts, and we'd play, or I'd help her make some crafts. When children grow up, often they seek mates, but when she was a kid, she had play dates. Her friends would visit, and I'd take them out to places where they'd run around and shout, with glee which some kids have in great supply, that spills on grown-ups on whom they rely. For years I had a children entourage of friends and half-siblings who'd even lodge at my home, and it didn't make me bitter to be relied on as a babysitter, as it was lots of fun for me as well, a blessing in great contrast to the hell of separation and divorce, unlike an eagle that moves so slow, 5 years till it was legal. I took my kid to pre-K at BC, where I was working so she'd be with me, on lunch breaks when we'd have some office fun. But in a lightning flash those years were done. The schools where we were living weren't the best, or scored low in a state assessment test. And at the time that seemed good cause to move to somewhere schools were better. Tests can't prove a school is worse or better, but back then this seemed a good barometer. We went to nearby Arlington, where I found rent. I could afford, though everything was high, so never would I have enough to buy. We struck gold with our downstairs neighbors who were Germans in the States a year or two. They had 2 daughters near my daughter's age, from preschool to a kindergarten stage. Since those days when as princess she was crowned, she's often had a pal or two around. Her friends at first were mostly like my own, from other countries, so that she has grown, with friends from far and wide like Germany, Bhutan and China, and it seemed to me that this was wonderful as she unfurled, to have good friends from all around the world. For years my life was serious and brainy, now days were full of silliness and zany, and I enjoyed the times I photographed, the things my daughter did at which we laughed. In many pictures she would seem to fly, like gravity was something she'd defy. And I shot many times this kind of scene, her in the air suspended and serene. I wish to have a record of such flights, for years ahead that could hold woes and frights. So she would see, though she grew old and sore, that she could fly as she had done before, in different ways than she had done back then, but somehow she could always soar again. She'd get the hiccups often when she laughed, so I made lots of jokes and tried to craft fun ways that she'd get more and measure the day's success with hiccups as a treasure. She'd make some fake foods out of leaves and muds, and I'd pretend they thrilled my dad taste buds. Since I have wished to stay a kid at heart, I much enjoyed to play each acting part that her imagination cast me in, each role a prize that I was glad to win. I loved to act as though upon a stage, for her and for her friends of her own age. As they'd throw balls at me and I'd pretend they knocked me out or brought me to my end. As little kids I found regard as fun, to feel that they are powerful and won. Play fights with grown-ups bigger than they are. My acting roles did not make me a star, yet they're among my life-pick favorites. But sometimes too she'd have some hissy fits, when I set limits that she wished to cross, expecting that she shouldn't have a boss. In one such fit, she wallpapered my room with papers that she filled in angry gloom, with "I hate you" spelled in giant letters. But shortly afterward she would feel better, and would express a love that wouldn't stop. "I love you to the stars," with sprinkles on top. When Emily had reached the age of 9, her mom had gotten her a cute canine. But where we lived no canines were allowed, as they were deemed too hairy and too loud. But we would smuggle him when darkness fell, so nobody would see and none would tell. So that the dog could always be with her, when she was with me or when with her mother, I looked for some place we could have a pet, My sister helped in finding one I'd get. We've lived with that fun-loving dog since then, and he has just turned 70, that's 10, in human years, through which he's been a joy, for half her childhood, a sweet good boy. To raise a kid is not just fun and games, as anyone who's done so knows the aims of kids and parents are at times at odds, and though to babies grown-ups seem like gods, as an infant grows to toddler then kid, it sometimes may occur they'd like to rid their lives of rules or some parental orders, and throw a fit or cross forbidden borders. The hardest thing to get my kid to do was have her bite a vegetable and chew. From when she was a tot and liked to snuggle, until this very day it's been a struggle. I used techniques like serve the daddy dish, while she would watch a program as her wish. But though techniques like this were efficacious, she always thought of vegetables as heinous. With few exceptions, such as broccoli, submerged in cheese till it was hard to see. I hope as she matures, her taste buds will open, so she gets a healthy fill of balanced foods she won't eat as a favor, but since she likes their wholesomeness and flavor. It's possible that since I got divorced, and I regretted that she thus was forced to rarely be with mom and dad together, but be with mom from whom I'd go to get her, to spend the other half or more of time with me, I overcompensated possibly, and pampered her too much to make up for the tapestry of family that tore. In old days, parents may have used a belt or ruler as a punishment. I felt these methods were barbaric. In our times, such disciplines have been regarded crimes. Yet compensation may have made me lax, and too permissive with her words or acts. As when for some new toy she overhounded, as I recall just once I had her grounded. In retrospect, I wished I gave the sense that actions all will have a consequence, that may not be avoided by just talks. Apologies can't shield us from life's shocks. But still I feel that I instilled in her a sense of wrong and right. What may occur is hard or is impossible to tell. I made mistakes, but feel I raised her well. Though I was brought up Catholic and baptized, a mental ailment, when I grew full-sized, gave me great difficulty with religions, and many years I've struggled with revisions of my beliefs which I have documented, endowed with reason though they seem demented. I've heard that certain people meaning well have told my daughter she will go to hell because she's not a Christian as they are, and talk like that has pushed her very far from that religion they were speaking of, though I insisted that our God is love. She dreamed with angels while she still was little, but as she grew that fragile link grew brittle and broke. But I have tried hard to instill the sense of its importance to her still, a sense there's more to life than only matter, a sense that in the end just love will matter. While some have spoken of a God of wrath, I pray God holds her through whatever path she finds herself upon from light to dim, and hope that every path will lead to Him, who's not a him, or her, or even it, but love that can't be fathomed, infinite. As fate would have it, when she hit her teens, my mental health was blown to smithereens. But this was not to do with her, but something that just happened to occur when she attained the age of adolescent, and some things were unbearably unpleasant. Like when anxiety kept me from sleep, so days felt like a climb that was too steep, that started with an awful lot of fuss, of making sure she wouldn't miss the bus. The sleeplessness made me feel overloaded, and then my latent OCD exploded. But I had been an easygoing parent, and mental troubles sometimes aren't apparent, as when a person needs to walk with crutches, so that she couldn't see me in the clutches of something that was difficult to bear, when I behaved as if it wasn't there. But she has spoken openly with me, and I have told her of my history, including things which have been difficult, but which have also served as catapult, propelling me from what's been hard to stand toward other ways to be and understand. From struggles of the dad on whom she's leaned, I hope that something helpful may be gleaned. Since as a child I was very shy, and thus missed lots of living chances, I tried to instill in her a bravery for speaking up to not miss out like me. Apparently I have succeeded. It appears she's far from shy, the opposite. Whereas I had been timid, she's been bold. Like this a curled up seedling can unfold. Where I would never speak of birds or bees, and other kids relentlessly would tease, by when she was a teen no topic was off limits, even bees and how they buzz. And I deemed that a healthy way to be, as she began to blossom gradually. But there were some things I would not find out till later years, when she would talk about their happening when they were history, though at the time they were unknown to me. Communication channels may not open within a heated torrent of emotion, but like a ship that set off on the ocean, I hope that if she needs to, she'll express the need for help, relay an SOS to me or to another who would help. So in a harbor's arms she will be held. As kid she'd fly through her imagination, but as she grows she'll have to face the nation. It's sad to think that since when she was one, the country's been at wars it hasn't won. Yet as she reached adulthood at 18, a state of peace was all that she had seen, because the wars were being fought abroad, so she could grow to be a carefree broad. It's easy here for worldviews to be narrow and aim for our own good as with an arrow. But many people still are cannon fodder, and I have tried to give a view that's broader, about a world that's full of joy and sorrow, in which we can't know what will strike tomorrow. In life that's more by far than boobs and booty, and merely superficial made-up beauty. And with the time allotted us to live, there's much that we can do so that we give some things that make the world a better place, though very slowly, at a turtle's pace. From she, a treasure which I never earned, but have been blessed with, there's a lot I've learned. Relationships a two-way street, I knew I'd need to teach lots to her as she grew. But sometimes it has worked the other way, as I have learned from what she'd do or say. And I recall a load of fun we had when we swapped roles, though she was not the dad, but much enjoyed pretending she was mad. A stern, strict piano teacher testing me on music notes with flashcards I would study, delighting at each answer I got wrong, while I learned how to read and play a song. The funny stories of her childhood outnumber shore sand grains. I wish I could recall and tell more than a little stash of all the memories that time can smash. But if I were to tell them all, I'd need to quit my job to write for all to read the stories, and I'd have no time as well for new ones which I'd also want to tell. I hope, though, that this little summary, containing just the tip of memory, conveys how wonderful for me it's been to be her dad, though it can just begin to scratch the surface of what's very deep, the treasured memories I want to keep. As I write now my rhyme biography, I think of one book that she wrote for me, a book she gave me when I had turned 50, handwritten, full of drawings that were nifty, a book that moistened eyes which had been dry, because it moved me far enough to cry. When I consider what a fool I was, in youth as birds would sing and bees would buzz, in thinking that I wasn't cut out for fatherhood and tried to slam that door. I'm glad her mom convinced when we got hitched, as life has been immeasurably enriched. Through parenting of she by whom I'm blessed, among all my life's blessings of the best. Although the marriage blew up like a bomb, I am forever grateful to her mom. As I am writing now this story's words, she's starting, as do other fledgling birds, to fly out on her own and leave the nest, and I hope for her in her every quest. Much love and happiness through every stage, extending to a healthy, ripe old age, beyond 100, with her own kids, maybe. Forever loved through all her years, my baby.